Bill Gaither spent 8 decades at a piano, and in that time he learned the difference between a voice that fills a room and a voice that reaches something inside a person before they even register what has happened. He gathered some of the most gifted singers in Christian music history around him, built a ministry through the Gaither Homecoming recordings that reached tens of millions of people, and wrote songs that found their way into hospital rooms and gravesides when nothing else fit. So when a man with that kind of perspective sits down and speaks honestly about regret, about one departure that has stayed with him for 30 years, what comes out carries a weight that does not pretend to be something smaller than it is. Michael English grew up in North Carolina, the son of a minister, surrounded by Southern gospel music, before he was old enough to understand what it could do to the people hearing it. Singing was not a choice so much as something he was built for, and his years with the Singing Americans, one of the defining Southern gospel quartets of the 1980s, had already drawn serious attention from people inside the industry before Bill Gaither encountered what that voice truly carried. What Bill understood went deeper than range or technique, and when Michael formally joined the Gaither Vocal Band in 1985, that understanding translated into something real. Bill gave him room, not a slot in a quartet arrangement or a designated part on a page, but genuine creative space to inhabit a lyric the way only he knew how. That first Homecoming video, filmed in 1991 inside a gymnasium in Alexandria, Indiana, became something none of the people in that room had entirely planned for. The camera found Michael English and kept returning to him because when he sang, the line between performance and prayer dissolved in a way that audiences registered before they had words for it. His eyes would close at certain moments in a phrase, and the feeling of the entire space would shift, not the sound itself, but what the sound was doing to whoever was in it. What happened in that gymnasium launched a ministry that grew to hundreds of Homecoming recordings, watched by tens of millions, and Michael English stood at the center of what made those earliest videos feel impossible to replicate. By 1993, 6 Dove Awards in a single year confirmed what audiences had already decided. Nashville was paying close attention. A solo career was climbing alongside his Gaither Vocal Band work, and the people around him understood they were watching a gift that arrives rarely and comes without instructions for how to sustain it. That changed when 1994 arrived, and the voice that had stopped people in living rooms across America went silent without warning. A moral failure that was both painful and public pulled Michael English away from gospel music entirely. He returned the Dove Awards and stepped off every stage. The Homecoming recordings kept circulating, but the man behind them was gone from every platform that had carried his name. What the public registered was the fall. What fewer people paid attention to was how Bill Gaither chose to respond, in the months immediately following and in the 30 years since. Bill did not erase Michael's contribution from the Homecoming story. Those early videos stayed in circulation and kept reaching people in exactly the moments those people needed something true, and Bill never pulled them. That decision communicated more than any official statement could have. Across the years that followed, whenever Michael's name came up, Bill spoke about him with something that could only be described as a father's grief, not disappointment in someone who failed professionally, but genuine pain for a person he loved, watching go through something devastating without knowing how to reach across the distance it opened. What came out of Bill's recent conversation was more direct than anything he had offered publicly before. Asked whether any voice in the full Gaither Vocal Band history had left before the world was finished hearing what it carried, he said Michael English's name without hesitation. The phrase he used to describe that gift had clearly been turned over in his mind for a long time. He called it inhabited singing, the ability to be so completely present inside a lyric that the listener stopped processing melody and words analytically, and instead felt something reach the part of them where faith and religion actually live. That quality, Bill said, had never appeared in quite the same form in any other singer, before or since. And then, he said the part that stopped everyone listening. He admitted regretting that he had not worked harder in those critical months of 1994 to create a path that let Michael step back rather than step away entirely. The gospel community, and he placed himself inside that admission without deflection, was not as equipped to hold space for someone in that kind of crisis as the songs they sang every night required them to be. Grace as a lyric and grace as a daily choice made toward a real person in a situation that does not resolve cleanly are two entirely different things, and the gap between them is exactly where gifted people fall before anyone reaches them. Michael English did find his way back. He returned to recording and performing, and the quality Bill named, that fullness of presence that made a listener feel genuinely seen rather than simply moved, remained intact through everything the difficult years had carried. He has spoken about that period with a candor that functions as its own form of ministry, and he has spoken about Bill Gaither with a love that nothing could manufacture, which means it was not manufactured. The distance between welcoming someone home after they have made their own way back and going out to meet them before they have to make that walk alone is something Bill has turned over across these 30 years. He was clear about which of those two things he wishes he had done, and clear that the grace he spent his life writing songs about required the harder version. Russ Taff's story runs through the same territory. One of the most powerful voices in the broader Gaither family, Russ carried a private battle with alcohol for years, kept largely hidden out of fear of what the Christian music community would do with the truth if it surfaced. Bill's relationship with him through that period reflected the same refusal to write a person out of the story when the story becomes inconvenient. The same conviction that redemption is not theology, to explain from a platform, but a practice sustained toward actual people in actual trouble. What Bill Gaither's honesty opens up is not a verdict about 1994 or any specific decision anyone made. The question his admission raises is what any community built around the gospel actually does when one of its own stumbles publicly and badly, and whether the answer in practice matches what that community sings about on its best nights. Bill is not claiming it did in 1994. That is exactly the weight of what he said. An older man looking back and finding the gap between what he believed and how he acted when belief was genuinely tested, and naming that gap plainly, without packaging it in a resolution it has not earned. The Homecoming recordings, the Gaither Vocal Band albums that became the soundtrack of so many people's faith across 35 years, all of it exists inside this larger story. David Phelps brought a tenor voice that many still consider the most technically complete in the history of gospel music. Guy Penrod carried a reverence that landed in the chest before the mind had processed it. Mark Lowry brought genuine tenderness underneath the laughter. Gary McSpadden gave every room a depth that held everything together, each voice irreplaceable in a different way, and Bill gathered all of them across those decades. But Michael English is the name he reaches for when the question is, which voice the world never quite finished hearing? At 82, still at the piano, still gathering people around songs that carry something real, Bill is telling a story about himself as much as he is telling one about Michael English. Christianity has been working out the distance between preached grace and practiced grace in real time since its beginning, and no community inside that long tradition has solved the gap cleanly. What makes Bill's admission worth sitting with is not that it resolves anything, but that it refuses to pretend the gap was not there when it costs something real to acknowledge it. The people who sat in their living rooms in 1991 and felt something shift when Michael English sang in that gymnasium already knew what Bill is saying now. They felt it before they had language for it. And the man who recognized that gift first and built the largest possible stage for it is still 30 years later paying attention to what love actually requires when it is put to the test.